Hello, I'm Scott. I'm the global brand ambassador from Tomatin Distillery here. So it's my role to travel the world and tell everyone about the wonderful whisky that we make at Tomatin. But I'm also involved in cask selection, blending and maturation. So also get that front row view of whisky production here at the distillery. Yeah, so the oldest cask that we have is actually right below us right now. I'm sitting right above it. It's a 1967, and that's the oldest cask we have here at Tomatin, so nearly 55 years old. It's a great question, and I think the thing about Tomatin is that it's designed as a spirit. We've talked about it as we've been going around, to be versatile and to be at home in a wide variety of cask styles. And I think what we find is that different casks are particularly good at different age points. So there's no one size fits all when it comes to Tomatin, and I think that's probably what's most important about it. It's what makes the job so enjoyable, is trying to learn what works at that point, what works at that point, what works at that point. So that's a horrible situation, really, and it's one that it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen, you know. So when we're looking at some of the oldest casks that we have here, by a rule of averages, the casks that would go under 40%, they will be your oldest casks. So when it gets to that point, we're sampling these casks every few months to make sure that the strength is okay and is above 40%. Luckily, in the time I've been here, I've never seen it where we've been below 40%. If that was ever to happen, the option that we have available to us is to vat it with something else to bring it up to strength. The problem with that is that it has to be if we were to put an age on it, it would be the age of the younger cask. So you lose that kind of vintage point. The other thing we could do is put it into a really kind of high-end blend if we wanted to. Yeah, that's a good one. That changes almost daily, but I think a style of Tomatin that I particularly like is between that 15 and 20 mark, and a combination of bourbon and refill hogsheads. That all those Tomatin fruit flavours start to come to life, and they go even further when we start to get to the Tomatin 30-year-old, which is that. It's 30 years in a mix of bourbon and refill hogsheads. It's just this explosion of tropical fruits, and that's the style of whisky that I love. It's a really interesting question, that. I think the only place that the Scotch whisky industry is at competition is on the shelf, when we're looking for the attention of the consumer. Everything up until that point is a massive, massive collaboration. And the whisky industry's been built on that basis. Today, when we talk about Scotch whisky, we're always talking about single malt, but we've still to remember that more than 90% of the whisky that's sold globally is blended whisky. And the vast majority of those blends are created through reciprocal deals. So casks from our distillery will be traded with casks from another distillery, so that we can make our blend with the other components that we need, and they can make their blend with the components they need. And even on the single malt side of things, in the time that I've been in the industry, I've found it to be the most incredible, close-knit community of people. Whenever we're travelling the world, whenever we're in Germany for whisky festivals and things like Limburg or Munich and things like that, Frankfurt, it's always so much more fun because you know your pals from other distilleries are going to be there and you can go for a drink afterwards. And last year, when we were at the very beginning of the pandemic and everything started to move virtually, at Tomatin here we hosted the world's first virtual whisky festival, and that was only possible because I was able to contact ambassadors from other companies and say, look, this is going to go out on our channels, but do you want to be involved? And we had 10 brands all contributing and telling us about their whisky. So the whisky industry, it's that kind of thing. The rising tide lifts all ships, you know. So when whisky's doing well, everyone does well, and it makes sense to help everyone to get to that point. So I'll be totally honest, that most of my attention is on Scotch whisky. That's just by the nature of it. But I'm a whisky fan myself, so I do, you know, when I'm at shows, I have a look at the other guys and things. I've always been interested. At kind of when I started getting into whisky really was when Teeling started to bubble away. So I've been able to kind of follow the journey of Teeling. It's really great to see the spirit actually been coming out of Dublin now. I'm a big fan of the guys over at Milk and Honey over in Israel, and the whisky that they're making there is wonderful. Even their 2-year-old spirits are just stunning, stunning things. I'm a big friend of Shilton from Paul John Distillery, so always love a drama Paul John. But I think as well, you know, one of my favourite whiskies that I've tried in recent years has been the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, and that's from Heaven Hill Distillery. So I think, you know, when I'm looking at distilleries out with Scotland, I'm not only looking at new distilleries or small distilleries, I'm looking at the quality of whisky. But one thing that's really interesting me personally right now is the world whisky category, and what I mean by that is the blended malts from whiskies from around the world. I think that's going to be really interesting in the years ahead, to see the style of whisky that can be created when, you know, you don't just look at Scotland, England, you look at the world and how we can marry those flavours together. Craziest, I don't know if that's a term that we would use, because I think whenever we're selecting a cask, we have a reason for selecting it. And although it might be something out of left field and a style that's never been heard of before, we know what we want to create with that. So we always view it, I think the term that we use quite often is weird and wonderful, you know, just to kind of express that this is not your traditional Scotch whisky. And I think for me, the weirdest wonderful that we have right now is Japanese shochu casks. You would have seen in the visitor centre there, we had some Kubokken, which was matured in Japanese shochu casks. And it's a really interesting spirit in and of its own right, and the casks themselves create this almost ethereal mouthfeel. The whisky almost melts in your mouth into these lovely citrus and kiwi fruit flavours. So they're really, really interesting. And as I showed you when we were looking around there, we've just taken delivery of some Colombian oak casks, so really excited to see how they progress in the years ahead. And we're always going to be looking out for new things. The nature of what we do at Tomatin, particularly when it comes to limited releases, is to try and introduce people to new flavours within whisky. We just had our French collection there, which had Rivesaltes and Montbazillac casks, which were cask types that most people have never heard of before, let alone try whisky matured in them. So that's what we're always looking to do here.